بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So we have been talking about general the scholarly life of Mulla Sadra, and then we mentioned 11 points about him that makes these knowing these 11 points makes us understand how he was able to come up with such system of philosophical thought that after Mulla Sadra has been dominant. Now we carry on with introducing his published books, those which are available. So Sheikh Ubudiyat says we can divide his published books into 5 categories. First, philosophical texts means texts which have philosophical approach, even if it's about Quran. For example, Aswar itself, Al-Hikmatul Muta'aliyah fil Aswar al-Aqliyat al-Arba'a, which is the complete name for Aswar, is the most famous book with this attitude. It talks about Umur Amme, general things in philosophy, about Johar and Araz, about Nafs, about Mabda and Ma'ad. The second book is Ash-Shawahid al-Rububiyyah. Inshallah, in the next semester, we will study Shawahid al-Rububiyyah. The same topics like Asfar are there, but discussion is much more precise and brief, concise and brief. Mafatih al-Ghaib, which has Quranic, philosophical and mystical discussions, and it's compiled shortly before demise of Mulla Sadra. So when he was 60 years old, just about 5 years before he passed away, he finished this book. Al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad, which he wrote when he was 40 years old. Inshallah, we will give you a chronological order of the books as well. Second category is made by the books which are like commentaries or comments on philosophical texts. For example, Sharh al-Hidayat al-Athiriyah, or his ta'liq on Ilahiyat al-Shifa, or ta'liq on Hikmat al-Ishraq. Third, philosophical essays like Al-Hikmat al-Arshiyah, which is known as Arshiyah in Mabda' and Ma'ad. Al-Madhahir al-Ilahiyah, again in Mabda' and Ma'ad. Al-Mashaa'ir in Umur Amme and Mabda'. Zadul Musafir in Ma'ad al-Jismani, corporeal resurrection. Risalatul Huduth, about createdness of the world. Risalatun fi ittisaf al-mahiyyat bil-wujud. Ittisaf al-mahiyyat bil-wujud is a difficult subject, so there's an essay about it. Inshallah, we will say how many times this is discussed in Aswar. Risalatun fi tashakhus. You remember in Bidayah we had discussion about tashakhus, and also in Nihaya. What makes something in an individual, a single reality? According to Mulla Sadra, it's only wujud that can make something mutashakhis, not certain awaras of wujud. رسالة في سريان الوجود، رسالة في القضاء والقدر، رسالة في الواردات القلبية, those things that occur in the heart. رسالة إكسير العارفين, إكسير. رسالة في الحشر، رسالة مسألة القدر في الأعمال يا رسالة خلق الأعمال، رسالة اتحاد العاقل والمعقول، رسالة أجوبة المسائل الجيلانية، رسالة أجوبة المسائل الكاشانية، رسالة أجوبة المسائل النصيرية، رسالة أصالة جعل الوجود، رسالة الحشرية، رسالة الشواهد الربوبية, which has his exclusive ideas, رسالة الفوائد، رسالة اللمية في اختصاص الفلك في موضع معين، رسالة المزاج، رسالة المسائل الفلسفية, ورسالة أجوبة المسائل. So you see, he was very much active in writing as well as thinking and contemplation. The fourth category is Quranic or Rewai hadith-based works like Asrar al-Ayat, Tafsir al-Quran al-Karim, Sharh Usul al-Kafi. Sharh Usul al-Kafi didn't complete, but is one of the very last books by Mulla Sadra when he was 65 years old. And this is amazing. You know, sometimes I say to the brothers that if you want to do some work on the Quran, like translation or commentary, you should do it at your last stage of development. So that when you have learned everything that you needed, you have been teaching, you have been writing, lecturing other subjects, when you become very mature, then you work on the Quran. So Mulla Sadra worked on this tafsir as one of the last books. Inshallah, we'll say that there are 3 books that he was working on them when he passed away. رسالة متشابهات القرآن ورسالة في تفسير سورة التوحيد. And then miscellaneous works like إيقاظ النائمين, to awaken those who are asleep. And this is mystical, philosophical, but even in philosophical discussions, you can see mystical attitude. كسر أصنام الجاهلية, breaking the idols of ignorance. And رسالة أصل, about 3 principles, which is a criticism of some ulama who were zahir bin, who were just satisfied with the superficial understanding of things. رسالة التنقيح في المنطق ورسالة التصور والتصديق. Because Mulla Sadra, mashallah, has many works and also his ideas were also developing. He was a dynamic person, thinker, scholar. So it will be very helpful to know which book was first written, which book was second written, etc. So in some of his works, he was putting the date of finishing the book, compiling the book. And sometimes he was referring to his own age. For example, how old was he when he finished this book? And Sheikh Ubudiyya said there are also some other references and some other evidence. Based on that, we can say it's most likely that this is the chronological order of works of Mulla Sadra. One, maybe his very first writing was Risalatun fi Sarayan al-Wujud, an essay about the fact that existence is extended. Then Asfar, second book was Al-Asfar. Third and fourth, maybe these were same time, Al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad wa Sharh al-Hidayat al-Athiriyah. Same time. Fifth, الشواهد الربوبية. So شواهد الربوبية is compiled after أسوار. 6 رسالة في الحدوث. 7 تعليق على حكمة الإشراق. 8 and 9 together مشاعر and رسالة في اتحاد العاقل والمعقول. 10 مفاتيح الغيب. 11 عرشية. 12, 13 and 14 again together شرح أصول الكافي. تعلیقه on الهیات شفا and تفسیر کبیر. Towards the end of his life, he was busy with these 3 books, Quran, Hadith, and الهیات شفا. Unfortunately, he was not able to complete these 3. Rahmatullah alayh. Now, we have very good discussion here that you must remember always when we refer to his books. If you don't know these things, maybe you cannot understand what was his real position, or maybe you don't understand why he spoke in this way. So, this is about his methodology, his approach. Not methodology as such, but general things about his methodology. Number 1, as he himself says, so this is something that he himself, notifies. He normally starts with explaining a philosophical issue according to the opinion of mashhur, like, you can say famous or mainstream ideas, and defends that. Then, in another place, when people are familiar with mashhur, and this is also very fair, very wise, that, first let people know what is mainstream. Some people just mention their own ideas, but first say what is the mainstream. So after that, then he was introducing his ideas. So if you don't know this, you may think that first he has similar idea to mashhur, and then later he has another opinion. Maybe Mulla Sadra was suffering from conflict or contradiction. No. He has this approach that he first wants to introduce the ideas of majority of philosophers, what was established by that time, and defends it very well. And then he mentions his own idea. Maybe in another book, maybe the same book later. Unfortunately, some people who didn't understand this, they think Mulla Sadra was not consistent. Number 2, some philosophers, they don't that much spend time or pay attention to the history of philosophy and the way ideas were developed. They say, this issue, we have to see what's the argument for, what's the argument against, and make our decision. Some philosophers are like that. But Mulla Sadra was a person that was very much trying to understand ideas of different philosophers and the way these ideas developed. So in Aswar, for example, you find lots of discussion of this kind, which makes Aswar a very good source even for understanding history of philosophy or understanding ideas of previous philosophers. If you look at the index of the books and individuals at the end of Aswar, you see how much he has made references to books and scholars. The third point is that Mulla Sadra, like many other Muslim philosophers, they have positive view about some of the great philosophers in ancient, Greece, some of ancient Greek philosophers, like Aristotle, for example, Socrates. So they believed, and Mulla Sadra believed, that they were monotheists, and maybe some of them were prophets even. For example, if you refer to Aswar, volume 5, pages 206 and 207, you find that he considers them as prophets and monotheists. And he tries as much as possible to explain what is quoted from them in the way which is acceptable. He tries to find a good interpretation for them. Even sometimes the reader may get the impression as if they had the same issues that we deal with today, the same, detail, the same depth of discussion. But maybe some of issues were not raised at that time. But Mulla Sadra tries to explain and interpret in a good possible way. Also, number 4, Mulla Sadra has careful usage of 2 kinds of titles. When he is satisfied with someone's understanding, if he believes someone was a real philosopher, he calls them Philosoph or Hakim. But if someone dealt with philosophical issues, but Mulla Sadra is not satisfied with the level of understanding and depth, he calls them Mutafalsif. Mutafalsif means someone who pushed himself into philosophy but was not a real philosopher. People who have a kind of approach which is, critical but not deeply intellectual or burhani. Sometimes you see Mulla Sadra, is expressing his regret why he spent his life in studying works of mutafalsifin, the people who were not real philosophers. But Sheikh Ubudiyat says he doesn't regret studying works of philosophers, even when he was very, spiritual. Even, for example, when he himself became a great, philosopher, he didn't regret why he studied philosophers, because this helped him. But he regrets why he spent lots of time understanding what these people who are Ahl al-Jadal and this kind of things say, who are not true philosophers. Point 5. Mulla Sadra many times mentions, along with his own philosophical discussion, some verses of the Quran or Hadith, or refers to opinions and sayings of some scholars, some philosophers, some mystical findings, but as support, as extra or additional evidence. It's not that he mixes up philosophy with other things, or, for example, when he has a weak position, he tries to strengthen his position. When he has weak argument, he tries to strengthen it by quoting other things. No, he wants to show that the same thing can be understood from other things. Sometimes this is to give a kind of also reassurance to the reader that what Mulla Sadra is arguing is not odd, is not strange. It can be understood from other sources as well. And sometimes it is just for emphasis on the strengths of such ideas. The 6th point is that Mulla Sadra discusses important topics in different places, or sometimes, for example, before making his own stance and position, he prepares the mind by somehow saying something about it. and then later proving it. For example, in just Al-Asfar, he talks at least, Sheikh Ubudiyat says, at least he talks in 20 places about asalatul wujud wa i'tibariyatul mahiyya, about primordiality of existence. It's not that he discusses this and finishes. No. In at least 20 cases of just one book, Al-Aswar. If you add other books, then you can see how the number can increase. Or about the topic which I said, he has an essay also about it, about ittisaful mahiyyat bil wujud, how mahiyya can be characterized or described with existence as mawjud. When we say al-mahiyyatu mawjudatun, what does it mean? So in just Aswar, about 15 cases he talks about this. About the fact that existence of ma'lul is rabit. Inshallah, we have one chapter about this, as I said in the beginning. He talks about this 12 places at least. So this is showing that he had something important in mind, and he prepares the reader for dealing with this issue in different places, different times, so that they really absorb it. And sometimes these different paragraph or text help us because he has explained. It's not that he repeats, just copy paste. Doesn't do copy paste. So sometimes when we put what he said about, for example, asalatul wujud in these 20 places, when we put them together, we have clearer picture. Because everywhere he may have said it differently, with using different explanation, other words, etc. But those who are not familiar and not, well trained, they may think, oh, there is confusion. Why, he's using different terms, different, expressions. Another thing is that although Asfar is his most expanded book on philosophy, and maybe you expect everything is explained in Asfar with its last version. But we said Aswar was one of his early books. And sometimes he has explained the same topic in another book, which you need in order to understand what he said in Aswar, because he wrote other books as well later. So you should not just be satisfied with studying Aswar if you want to understand transcendent philosophy. The eighth point that Sheikh Ubudiyat says is that because he was very interested in development of course, I say this part, I think it was because he was very much interested in development of the thought. So maybe he didn't 100% of times observe the kind of sequence that you expect if someone wants to write an organized book. Because you can imagine, again, I add this, a book which is of caliber of Aswar, 8 volumes, must have taken years, and you cannot expect from the author that in the beginning has the same structure for the book and organization that he has in the middle of the work or end of the work. Especially at that time, it was not easy to locate things. Now we can, take one chapter from beginning, put in another section of the book, easily. But at that time, especially with the development of the thought. Point 9. It's a general point. It's not only about Mulla Sadra. Sheikh Ubudiyat says you find sometimes in Ibn Sina, sometimes in Bahman Yar, and sometimes in other people. Their style of quotation and citation was or you can say their approach to citation was not the same as modern Western approach. In modern Western approach, when you take something from some previous writer, scholar, you give reference to that person. If you don't give reference, it means that it's mine. It's original. Original means it's new. Means it has originated from me. It has no origin, because original should be something which has origins, roots. But they mean by original means originates from me. Yeah. While we can say, if I say something and can show that this is said by Sheikh al-Saduq, Sheikh al-Mufid, Sheikh al-Tusi, Allama Tabatabai, I think this is also original. Actually, this is better capable of being called original. It has origins. It's not, fabricated. But the contemporary scholarship in the West is that original means you are the one who has introduced this idea. And if you don't quote, the assumption is that it's from you. But in the past, it was not like this. If they agreed with something, they might have quoted, not quoted, just use the terms or lines without mentioning the name. Sometimes they mentioned, sometimes they didn't mention. It was not necessary. Because one thing that I have in mind, it's not in the book, but I have in my mind, is because I think they were writing this not for the sake of publishing in journals and improving their CV, etc. They were writing this mainly for themselves, and secondly for people of the field. Everyone in the field was familiar with what, for example, if Mulla Sadra quotes something from Ibn Sina or uses the expression of Ibn Sina, he assumes that the people who read him already know what Ibn Sina says. So they can know. So it's not he's going to say, this is mine, and deceive people. No, this was not their approach. This was not their understanding. So their understanding was that if you find something agreeable, you could use the same lines. And maybe it was also a sign of respect that you use the exact wording of that person. So this should be in your mind, that Ibn Sina sometimes uses text or paragraphs, not too long, from Ibn Sina, Bahman Yar, Imam Razi, even Ghazali, although they were not philosophers. Actually, Ghazali was against philosophy. Fakhruddin Razi was in Mushakkik. But if you find something useful and agreeable, you can quote without necessarily mentioning. And sometimes also, when they were criticizing, also they were not mentioning the name of the authors for just privacy. Those who are familiar, they know. Those who are not familiar, they don't realize. Number 10. Mulla Sadra, when is writing something scholarly, like academic, he has very clear and straightforward language. Very clear and straightforward. But if it is not something, scholarly for, scholarship, something that, for example, he wants to share his own ideas and findings for history or, for potential, readers, basically, he is more into maybe his personality. Maybe he then has a language which is not as straightforward as in his scholarly academic works. Maybe becomes more poetic or more difficult to understand. When it comes to his, scholarly academic work, it's very straightforward and clear. And Sheikh Ubudiyat says, then some people think they can study Mulla Sadra without teacher. So I open Aswar and I read. Sometimes it can be even easier than Nihayatul Hikmah. Sometimes. They think that they don't need teacher. But they need teacher. Because everywhere is not clear. Plus, you need to know the whole system of Mulla Sadra and references to other places. The next part of this chapter is about متفکران تأثیرگذار. Who were the thinkers who influenced Mulla Sadra? The people that Mulla Sadra was somehow influenced or inspired by them. Inshallah, we discuss this next week, bi'Iznillah. We already discussed very important points in our 2 sessions today, and I hope you have got the book. At least those who can read Farsi, they can have the book, but I try to almost mention everything, plus if something else came to my mind. We take this book, inshallah, seriously for our study, and I hope, inshallah, you can do mubahatha as well. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.